All right, thank you to everybody for attending this webinar on the IDX Broker API. I'm really excited to be talking about it. I like APIs. I like being able to get lots of data in a programmatic way. I'm sure you all do too. That's why you're here. I know some of you out there are already accessing our API. So for some of you, this will be some review. You're already making API calls in whatever language your preference is. So I am going to be going over a lot of that stuff, so some things will be reviewed, but I have tried to toss in some things that may be useful to you, even if you're already accessing the IDX Broker Platinum API. That being said, let's go ahead and get started. I just heard some reminder that reminds me I have a webinar, which I'm already doing. So let's go ahead and get started here with our webinar. So the IDX Broker API, what it is and why we have it. The API actually stands for Application Programmer Interface. The reason it exists is to spread the utility of the data the IDX Broker provides. We get a lot of data on leads, a lot of data on featured listings, stuff on agents, so being able to access that in more than just a graphical interface is really important to developers, web developers, programmatic developers. Clients even can access this data in a programmatic and even automated fashion. And I got another reminder. Great. This API can provide data to a lot of different platforms, whether it be a CMS or CRM, a CMS like WordPress, which we use. Our plugin uses the API to bring in data. Website templates or themes. You can build a theme using the API to bring in elements from IDX Broker, any of that information that we're talking about. This can be anything from widgets to featured listings. So that's what it is and why we have it. Let's take a little bit closer look at that. Things we can't do with the API. This is really important. It'd be great if we could do everything with the API, but like everything in life, we all have limitations. Our API is no exception. The API cannot make property queries from the MLS. You can't pull the property listing details. So if you're looking to do that with the API, basically access the data feed from the MLS, you'll probably want to do that directly with each MLS. It's essentially what we do. You'll not be able to search through the listings or specific properties in the API. Again, for the same reason, if that's something you're really interested in, you should contact the MLS directly and get access to their feed. The only exception for this is the featured listings of a particular account. These are the listings that the agents own on their accounts. Those you can actually get through the API, and only information on these properties are going to be able to be returned via the API. All the other properties in the MLS, you're going to have to get from the MLS or access via the regular IDX Broker pages we provide. So another limitation here is going to be the number of calls per hour. With a client level key, which is the IDX Broker Platinum key that every client gets, the limit's 250 calls per hour. This means this also includes the calls that your WordPress plugin may make. If you're accessing the information outside of WordPress in another way to feed a CRM, this will apply too. It resets every hour. If you go over it, you will get a warning. It'll send an HTTP response header saying that you've gone over. It will reset itself after an hour and then you can continue to make calls. If you're getting overages within WordPress or without WordPress or outside of WordPress, you're probably going to want to take a look at your programming or your WordPress. Generally, these should not happen. 250 is plenty for normal usage. Now, if you're a partner, a developer partner, you do a secondary key. This is an ancillary key. By adding this to the request headers, this will up your limit from 250 to 750 per hour per client. So using the ancillary key in conjunction with your client level key, that's a pretty big increase in API calls. While that does make it a lot easier to make more calls, say for leads, over and over again per client, you still can go over with once you get a certain number of leads, even with 750, because leads have a lot of information. They have saved searches, they have saved properties, they have notes. These are all 3 different API calls per client. So with the partner level key, while you do get it a big boost in your hourly limit, there's another method specifically for leads I want to talk about later on called the aggregated method. This will get leads across all your clients in one call. So we'll be talking about that here shortly. I'll be showing an example of that as well. So let's go on to the next. So we do have some requirements. Obviously, you're going to need an API key, an IDX Broker Platinum key. That has to be included in your API call. The content type must be set in your request headers. And I'm going to go over the anatomy of a call here shortly in this webinar, so that way you can see these sections I'm talking about if you're not already using them. You must make your API calls using HTTPS. You will get responses when any of these things are not present in your API call. For example, even our WordPress plugin will tell you if you have an overage in API calls per hour, or if your API call is not using HTTPS, you'll get a different kind of error. And these are all response code errors that you can get from your API calls you make programmatically or within, even like I said, the WordPress plugin. So these things are some of the things that are definitely required. You cannot access the API without these 3 things for sure. So where do you get this key that I'm talking about if you haven't already got one? So the client level key is stored in the client level account. You can access it here on this page. This would be the home and then the API key control page within the IDX Broker Platinum dashboard. If you don't have a key in there, you can generate a new key. There's a blue button right here. There you can revoke a key if you need to for any reason. For example, if you've programmed something, you've had somebody program something and they're no longer with you and you don't want them to have access to that key anymore for security reasons. You can then revoke it and generate a new key. You can also see here when you go at an overage on your API calls. This is a cool little feature that's not really very well documented. This green background actually will turn red when you have too many calls to the API. It'll turn green again when you're allowed to have as many calls, or your call numbers reset. This graphical interface here, which is the normal IDX Broker dashboard, has a couple links, one to the documentation, which I'll hit on here shortly. Some preferences, for example, do you want your API calls to return XML or JSON? By default, it's JSON. You can override this here, and this setting can then be overridden in your request headers of your API call. There's also a little bit of analytics here on the traffic that you would be having in this account. You can see which calls are happening within the last couple hours, and it'll even generate a little chart for you to check that out. So that's a good way to see how your programming is hitting our servers with its requests. So this is where you would get the client level key again. If you want to get your partner level key, it's very similar. Also in your partner level dashboard. Only this time it is still home in API key control, but obviously you don't have the rest of the options that the client level has. You do have the same options as far as the preferences, the documentation, new key, revoke key. New key would be if you don't have a key generated when the partner developer accounts are started. They don't have a key there by default. You have to click new key. You can also see the traffic for these keys here. So here the API keys are very similar, but again the big difference here is this particular key, the partner level key, ups your number of calls you can make per minute, or per hour, I'm sorry, per hour. So the API was built as a RESTful API. What does that mean? What it means is by design it's supposed to be simple. Just a couple of verbs to control all the action. Your calls are going to fall into one of these 4 categories. It's either going to be a get call, post, put, delete. Get and these are very meant to be this way too, very self-explanatory. Get calls, get information from the IDX system. There's a lot of things you can do to modify your get call to call specific information or general information, whatever the case may be. Example would be calling just the leads in the API, in the URL for your API call, as opposed to leads/1, which will then return the information for just the lead with the lead ID of 1. Not specifying the lead ID, you'll get information for all the leads. So these are the kind of output modifiers I'm talking about that you can put in the query string. Post would be to add a new record to the IDX system. Again, leads would be a great example. You can add a lead through the request body. A put call would modify an existing record, and much like a post, but instead you're modifying information that's already there. Delete's probably the most self-explanatory of them all. It deletes a record from the IDX system. So let's look at the anatomy of an API call. This is taken directly from our documentation, our well-documented API documentation. This call is written in PHP. All our examples that I'm going to be going through today and that are on our API documentation are written in PHP. If you're looking for examples in other languages, you can send me an email and I might be able to help you depending on what language it is. Other than that, you should probably use this as a base to create your API calls. It's going to have the same things. It's all pretty simple. So it should be able to be translatable into just about any language you want that can make an API call. So let's go over the parts of it really quickly. The first part's going to be the URL. This variable here. It's going to have the aforementioned HTTPS on it. They're always going to go to api.idxbroker.com. The other components are going to indicate what we're talking about as far as our call. This particular call, as you can see, is a featured listing call. Again, this is required. This URL has to be in there. Your HTTPS is also required for this call. If you're a client, it'll say clients there in the string. If partners, say partners, and then the last part will be those modifiers I was talking about. The method, like all the methods we're going to talk about today, are the get method. This is also required. We need to know what method we're calling here, whether it's a get, a put, a post, or delete. Next thing required is going to be this headers array. These first two headers here are going to be required. This one actually is optional. And the optional output type of JSON overrides the preferences in our control panel. So back in the graphical control panel on the dashboard, if you select XML, but here you specify the output type as JSON you want, this will override what you're setting in the IDX Broker dashboard. The content type is always going to be the same. The access key, this is obviously an example access key, and you would replace with your own access key, that the API key I showed you back in the dashboard. So now that that's all been set up, we have to set up the curl. So the curl has a lot of options, more options. These are just the options in the documented or the API documentation. You can set some more options here to get more information. Request time, total time of transfer. I mean, if you look in some PHP documentation about some of these, the curl underscore setup, you'll find a lot of them. I'm going to show you one of them later that we can add to get a little bit more information about our API call and what's going on with the number of calls we're having. So now we execute this curl information and store the returned code for later reference. What this means is the code coming back from the API will always set back an HTTP code. This code will be, like I was saying earlier, will indicate to you the nature of the response. 200 means okay. 204 means the response was okay, but there was no data coming back, and so on and so forth, up to 500, which means some sort of unknown error, and we should be notified. This code is going to be this variable here, $code. You can simply echo this if you want to see it in print, or you can programmatically set up whatever you want to respond to whatever the code is. The response is actually this variable, $response. With this, again, if it's XML, you can simply echo it. If it's JSON, you could do print R, var dump, whatever you want to do. So that's pretty much a normal API call. Some of the API calls are a little bit different. Specifically the aggregated leads, which I'm going to show you later, they have a lot more modifying going on in the URL. So in the request headers, I mentioned that there are some options. So these options will modify the response that's coming, or augment the number of calls, things like that. So let's take a look at some of the optional ones really quickly. The ancillary key, of course, which is the partner level key. The output format, which I mentioned just a minute ago, whether it's going to be JSON or XML, it's your choice, whichever one you feel comfortable parsing or working with however you want. And this last one, which I think is pretty interesting, the API version. The reason we have this here is for future API versioning. Our API will be evolving, and there will be more methods coming. A lot of this will be announced later on when we decide which methods are going to be added, and or should one of our methods, our current methods, change. So if it changes, you would obviously have to update your programming. So let's add a few and see what that would look like. Here we have the same array that we had before. Instead, this time I've added my ancillary key as if I was a partner. This would up my limit of calls per hour, and I want to work with XML instead of JSON. So I've set output type XML to override any sort of settings and return the XML that I want to work with. All right. All this can be found here in our documentation on our API. Our API has got a lot of documentation on it. It's going over a lot of the same stuff. I've gone over here the response codes I mentioned earlier. Here's the explanation of the access limits, component levels, of course, and the change log. So you can see when our API is versioned. This would be where you would go to look for that. We have plenty of example codes like the ones I'm showing you today for each method. Let's take a look at a couple of them. So list components, they're all here, will be here on whichever level you want to access them on. If you want to access the client level, which I'm accessing right now, a partner level, information specifically about an MLS, or specifically about leads. Let's take a look at the clients really quickly. This will tell you which of the 4 verbs you can use: get, post, put, or delete. List components, for example, does have a get call. You will get information on this. You will not be able to post, put, or delete this information. Much like almost exactly like the example I've just shown you. Here is the code you would use for a PHP example call, and this would then return all the information. Some of these do have post and put and delete. Not every single one is going to. This is going to differ especially on the nature of the call. Leads, for example, do have get, put, and delete. Well, not delete. Get, put, and post. Bulk lead doesn't have get, post, but does have a put. Notes has all of them. And some of them are a little bit special. For example, you can clear a wrapper cache via an API call, which is pretty neat. And I'll show you that real quick. It's kind of a unique call in that it doesn't really return anything. It actually performs a function that you would have to perform in the IDX broker dashboard. So that's a pretty interesting call. So again, you can visit this. I'll provide the link here at the end of the video to go over this and get all sorts of example code for pretty much for every method we provide. Any new methods, again, will be provided there. The documentation will be provided there and updated. So let's head back to my presentation. So we've shown you the code, the API example code. Let's go ahead and run one and see the output so you can get a better idea of what we're working with here. I'm going to run this example code and return JSON. This is going to be get leads method at the client level. Again, the code is just like the example code, a lot like what I just showed you with the featured listings. Here's what we get back. These leads here have gone through a filter because I didn't want to show anyone's email. So all the emails are at idxbrokertest.com. This will be the case for any emails or phone numbers in any of my responses. We get a lot of information back really quickly about our leads: name, last name, email, agent owner, so we can see which agent owns this lead. All this information is returned to you. Then you are able to do with it what you will, which is send it to a CRM, send it wherever you want, store it, for example. Storing it's a great idea. Then it can be doled out to whatever resource you want to as you see fit once it's in a table of your liking. Again, this can be returned as this JSON, or as you can see, as XML. XML, I know a lot of people like working with XML more than JSON. It's your preference, so you can have either. Here we have everything separated by element IDs, element last name, all the same information, just with XML tags instead. So I've taken that information and placed it into a table. I make the API call. I then parse the API and insert it into the table of my choosing. Here it's just into a very simple table I've created. This could go into a database of yours if you'd like. I do recommend that because then you can do anything you want with the information without having to make another API call. Everything can be really quickly organized, and this could be information you provide to someone or some service. Either way, it's up to you. All this is coming from that last API call I just made. So I mentioned another set option before about the API call. So to get the hourly key usage out of the API call, I've added this to my API call. This will now prepend my response with the information I'm looking to get here. Hourly key usage, at the time I made this API call, I have used 6 API calls that hour. This is really useful when you're trying to budget your API calls. It would be great if we could just call all the time, real time, every second, but that's just going to be too much of a stress on resources, probably for both of us, for all parties involved. So some budgeting should be taken into consideration before you start pulling lots of information. Again, you can use this tool to help with that budgeting. You can programmatically see the usage and respond in kind with some sort of rate limiting or whatever will help with this API call load. So I talked a little bit about the aggregated leads method. The aggregated leads method is very different than the regular leads method I just showed you. And the reason for that is we're pulling a lot of data at this point. We're pulling data from as a partner level, as a developer partner, we're pulling data from every single client we have. So as you can imagine, that's going to be a lot. So there's some additional limitations which are laid out here, available also in our documentation. Really quickly, what they are, in a nutshell, they are time. You can specify how far back in time you want to pull leads from. This is great if this is the first time you're doing this. You can loop through this, setting each one of these as a variable for, like, let's say a week at a time. Have your API call loop through until it returns no more responses or it reaches a specific date. Then all that can be stored into your databases, and you'll have all the leads for that period of time going back. So let's go ahead and run it and see the amount of data we get back. This is JSON. I just ran this call. You can see it is quite a bit of data. This actually is a good thing in that now you can get all of your leads for all of your clients in one fell swoop, not having to go back and get them one at a time, which you can do. You can get leads one at a time by using the leads method, the client level leads method, which I showed in the first example, where we got JSON and XML. So it depends on your strategy and what you're trying to accomplish. If you have a single client who, for example, uses a CRM that you don't manage, you can get just their client, just that client's leads and send them off. But if you manage many clients or have a CRM or even a template, or if you just need to store them, you can get them all in one call. Now from this call, I can then extract the details for one client. So I'm going to make a table and get only account 702. 702 only had 3 leads, but I was able to, from the response, build a small table, section it off to just our client, the client I'm looking to work with here. Now I have all the customer's contact information. This could all be updated every time the API call is made. I would then be able to route this to let's say an agent who wants to follow up with these leads, or even put this kind of information. This would be great to go into CRM for like trip campaigns or something like that nature. So I mentioned that you can't get properties, and the one exception is featured listings. So I did want to show a quick example of that as well. All this stuff can be expanded upon. It doesn't have to look like this, obviously. This is all that is all dependent on your programming. So let's go ahead and check out the featured listings. I'm going to pull them for my demo API key, and then I'm going to go ahead and put them in an unordered list. So they're just going to have bullet points. Not going to be pretty, but first I make the API call. I get a bunch of featured listings from my demo account. This is all demo data. Now from that, I'm just going to grab a couple of them, place them in an unordered list, and display them on a web page. Here we have my featured listings with my demo API key. I made a fake listing here. This is a supplemental listing that got tossed in. As you can see, they just come in, and this is, like I said, an unordered list. See the bullet points, and one line of CSS to restrict the images from being full size. This is pretty raw. Of course, this can be dressed up with any div tags, any styling you want to do, and then shown on a client's website. These also can be stored and run, to budget your API calls. These kind of things can be stored and run, once an hour, once a day even, depending on. Once a day would be fine for some MLSs. Twice a day would be fine for some other MLSs, because on IDX Broker Platinum we do update for many MLSs twice a day. So since this has already been built, should I build this into a theme, a template, what have you? I can build this for every one of my clients and have it styled and ready to be styled for each one, and then simply change the API key and make the same call, put it in the exact same place, and I'll have different featured listings. I'll have the featured listings for the secondary client or the third. However, as long as the API key is set at the client level for each client. This can just be a variable, a form, however you want to attack that issue or that challenge. And as you can see, I made the same call, I did the exact same unordered list, and everything changes just with that one change of an API key. So that is the extent of the examples I wanted to show today. I do see we have a question about safe searches. You can pull the safe searches from the API. There is not a put to add safe searches via the API. Any limitations that we have currently will be something that we're going to be looking at for future versioning. If there's methods we're talking about that everybody wants for future versioning, feel free to send me an email, developers@idxbroker.com, and I can pass these wishes onto our development team and see what we can get going for the next version of the API, or adding a additional version to the API. The upcoming webinars, I'm looking to do a few of these since there appears to be some interest here. I'm going to look over the other 3 calls that we can make: put, post, and delete. I'd like to do one on the aggregated method specifically. And when we get new API versioning, I'd also like to cover that. That would be great for new methods that may be coming out, any changes in any of the requirements, any changes in the required request headers, or changes to the access limits, any changes that may come up once a new version has been decided upon. I'd really like to address that. I'd like to thank everybody today for attending our webinar. Like I said, I would like to do more of these, so if everybody is interested, please feel free to shoot me an email. And again, this will be posted on YouTube if you want to reference this at any point in time. Thank you again, and talk to you all soon. Bye.